Well, we're going to read Psalm 37 for a few moments, and we left off last week. We'll finish it over the next few days, and I hope this has encouraged you as much as it has encouraged me. David is writing. I think a lot of times the Psalms were used to teach the next generation and to pass on the faith. They use songs like we do to train up their children in the ways of God. And so a part of this psalm is a description or a contrast between the life of a good man, a righteous man, and the life of a wicked or an evil man or an idolatrous man. And you'll notice the phrase keeps showing back up about inheriting the land. And I want to unpack that for just a second, because that's not so. It's not such a common phrase for us today, so we don't resonate or identify with it the way Israel would have identified with it. Their land was given to them by God, so it was an inheritance. It was a heritage of the Lord. It was their strongest sense of identity and security, their place of being, their national identity, supposed to be wrapped up in their identity in God. Eventually, it became it became an idol unto itself. But at the time of the writing of this, David was honoring the Lord, leading the nation to worship the Lord. And in that context of relationship with God, God gave them an inheritance, this land. And that represented security, nationally and personally. It represented provision and safety and protection. So I think there's a metaphoric application for us today. There is a practical reality that we will inherit a new heaven and a new earth, okay? That we will move into that new kingdom of Christ at the end of time, and for all of eternity, we'll dwell in the place that God's given to us in safety and in peace and security. Isn't that awesome? I think also when you talk about the land in the Old Testament being the gift, the heritage, the inheritance of the people of God, I think bringing that forward, there's an application to all of the goodness and the grace of God and the promise of God to keep us secure, to keep us protected, to keep us safe. And so I want you to understand those parallels, that Israel would have identified their land as the direct gift of God out of their relationship with Him. They would have found their security and provision from Him in their ability to dwell peaceably in that land. And so we kind of left off around verse 23, 24, 25. So let's pick it up there. The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. And by the way, in the coming verses, it's almost like David now is going to profile, almost instructionally towards the next generation, like he's teaching his children, what does a good man look like? Okay, so we're declared good by God's grace, by the sacrifice of Christ, by our faith in that sacrifice. But then we're called to live a good life, and so we're not living that good life to earn our salvation, but we're living out of who we really are declared to be by God. So He's justified me. So why not live out of that justification? Why not live in honor to God and seek to live the good life that He calls me to live? Number one, because it glorifies Him, and that's the chief end or purpose of mankind, to live for God's glory. But number two, because it just makes sense. It's the life I was created to live. And number three, it is the blessed life. It is the life with the most favorable outcomes and consequences. So the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and He delighteth in His way. I think all the pronouns here are pointing back to the good man that's introduced in the top of verse 23, the steps of a good man. He delights in His way, talking about God's way. Though he fall, he, the good man, he shall not be utterly cast down, for the Lord upholdeth him with His hand. This is new territory here. I have been young and now I'm old, yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging bread. So the point there, David's saying, I've never seen God's people, those that are following Him. God takes care of His children. He feeds them. He doesn't ever forsake them. He makes sure they have their needs met. Now, let me just insert this, because again, when you interpret the Bible in view of the whole, didn't Paul say in Philippians 4, I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. I have learned to be abased and also to abound. So the promise here is not that I will always have abundance, okay? And it is not that I will never, in the moment, feel a need. It is the promise that that need will not go perpetually unmet, okay? And that God eventually always does take care of our basic essential needs. Give us this day our daily bread. Seek first the kingdom, and all these things shall be added unto you. So it's not the sense that you'll never experience less versus more, or never be abased versus abounding, okay? It's the idea that God will always, He'll never forsake you, and He'll always make sure you have your basic, your fundamental needs met. So you'll never be without a father to go to for your most basic needs. Verse 26, He is ever merciful and lendeth, and His seed is blessed. So again, the good man that God is profiling in verse 23 is a merciful man. He's a man whose needs are met by God. He is stabilized, verse 24, by God. This man, because of God's mercy, is a merciful man. And he's a generous man. He lends. He's looking to distribute the resources God has given to him. And his seed is ever blessed. So he's generous with future generations, and he is blessing those that are coming after him. And then David says, depart from evil. This is why I see the instructional side of this, maybe to the next generation. Depart from evil and do good and dwell forevermore. Dwell in the land forevermore is what he's referring to. So the admonition, depart from evil, do good, dwell forevermore. It says, though David is rehearsing and contrasting the good outcomes of following God and the terrible outcomes of the wicked, and then he's turning to the next generation and saying, please follow God. Please choose good. Please walk in the steps that God orders for you. Choose the good life. Choose to be the good man that God calls you to be, and that God permits you to be by His grace and His mercy. Look at verse 28. For the Lord loveth judgment, and forsaketh not His saints. They are preserved forever, but the seed of the wicked shall be cut off. The righteous shall inherit the land, and dwell therein forever. The mouth of the righteous speaketh wisdom, and his tongue talketh of judgment. So again, just we're continuing to understand how a good man thinks, how a righteous heart thinks, how a pure conscience and a pure life pursues good things, and that God is honored by these things, that God is pleased by good judgment, by those that are speaking wisdom, talking of judgment, the law of God in their hearts, and their steps shall not slide. It's just like a holistic view of the life of a good man. He's talking about his steps. He's talking about his discernment and judgment. He's talking about his family relationships, his generosity, his choices to do good and not evil, his heart, his steps. I mean, it's just this comprehensive view of the life, the journey, the relationships of a good man. And so that's kind of where I want to leave it today, is the contrast between our choices, choosing a good, righteous, honorable path through life versus a selfish, wicked, evil, self-centered path through idolatrous path through life. And David really teaching his family and his nation through this psalm the vast difference between a life following God, in God's care, held on to by God and holding on to God, versus a life lived apart from God. Now, I don't know where you are, okay? I'm speaking these devotions. I'm assuming that you got here by choice. You're seeking the Lord. Your heart's in the right place, and you are wanting God to order your steps, and you are delighting in His way. I mean, after all, you're the one that joined me on YouTube or Facebook or the church website today to pause for this moment. But maybe there's somebody that's listening, that God is inviting them back to this good life, back into relationship with God. And I just want to encourage you to run back into the merciful arms of your God. The first person I met on Sunday, his name was David. David may be watching right now. But the very first person on campus outside of our staff was a man named David that lives in Middletown, Connecticut. And the coronavirus pandemic prompted him to come back to the Lord. It awakened him spiritually. And he got online and he found Emmanuel Baptist Church. And he's been watching our live stream. And he's eager to become a member of our church family. And Pastor Derek met with him about church membership on Sunday morning. But it was amazing, and it was just a moment that God encouraged my heart with, that God said to me, see what I'm doing? There are countless stories like David's through online ministry that maybe people will never even met, that are not local geographically, who God's using the teaching of his word and the ministry of our church to call them back. Maybe that's you today. Maybe your life has been dormant spiritually. Maybe this is a call to salvation or a call to revival, renewal, and God's calling you back into relationship and fellowship with himself. He's asking you and inviting you to reawaken all of those good things in your life. And maybe he uses Psalm 37 to show you the path you were on and the path you need to be on, and how that a life lived in God's grace is a good life. It's a life with well-ordered steps and a heart of mercy and generosity. It's a heart of protection and provision, a life of protection and provision, and it's a good journey to take. I've followed God imperfectly, all right? He is so patient, so gracious, so forgiving of me. And yet, I really do truly want to follow him. I want to do life his way. I want to know him. I want to live by his judgments and his laws. I want him to order my steps. I know that's your prayer as well. I hope you'll meditate on that today. Maybe there's somebody in your life that you need to be like David and teach them. Maybe it's a grandchild. Maybe it's a neighbor or a coworker or a friend. But you need to transfer to them, hey, there's good outcomes to following God. The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. So my challenge to you today is depart from evil and do good and dwell forevermore. Keep following him. Keep holding on to his promises. Have a great Tuesday, and I will meet with you tomorrow. We'll see you then.